Hello, people of the internet, my name is Atlas, and today I am finally back to bring you another Deltarune theory video. Today we're going to be discussing a very important aspect of the lore that I feel has been getting a bit more attention in recent months. The Angel from the Prophecy, what it means, and what, or who, it is. Before we get into that though, if you end up liking the video, make sure to leave a like so I know, and if you want to see more in the future, I'll definitely be making more like it. So, for starters, what exactly is the Angel? Well, it is something that has been brought up a few times within Deltarune. As far as the main story goes, this is mostly in relation to the prophecy, with the mention of banishing the Angel's heaven in Chapter 1, and a prophecy in Chapter 4 reading, "The Angel banished will meet with its desire." However, outside of this, there are a few more mentions of the Angel, primarily in a religious context, as it appears to be the primary being worshipped by Hometown's religion, with mentions of it watching over people and having mercy upon them. Honestly, this combination of mentions is pretty interesting, as it almost seems contradictory. The Dark World stuff on them poses them as something to be banished away, while Lightners seem all about it. This is especially weird since the Lightners seem to know the basics of the prophecy. This makes me wonder if there's maybe more going on here than what meets the eye, with a description of banishing maybe being a bit misleading compared to what's actually going on here. Maybe it's more like the Angel is sacrificing themselves by allowing themselves to be banished rather than it being a malevolent force or something. But before we go any farther with this discussion, this is the part of the video where I'm afraid I have to make a confession. I don't think this is actually a very difficult question. I'm sure many of you have been thinking this the entire time, and you're right. Honestly, it's to the point where I'm sure that the game knows by now that the players that are paying close enough attention to the game may already have an idea of the truth. The Angel is us, the player. I mean, it just makes sense. Let the Angel watch over you, Kris. Yeah, kinda like what we're literally doing with our top-down perspective. The Angel's light this, the Angel's light that. Meanwhile, the main source of light in the game is Kris's soul, which we control, and light represents reality, and, you know, we're real, aren't we? Player Town being absolutely covered in angel imagery, including hearts with wings, our view of the Angel's form being blocked in such a way that allows us to see our own reflection in its place, and to top it all off, that moment in Chapter 4 where we literally get covered by an angel doll and get to move it around. Now, this isn't the only idea for the Angel currently circulating, and I will address those more in the video, don't worry, but a lot of these points feel quite blatant, and given how popular it is, it would feel disingenuous to ignore it for much longer. But that raises the question, right? If the answer is that simple, then why is there so much more left in the video? Well, that's all nice and dandy, but what exactly does the Angel mean? Why is it even relevant when we've only had like 2 offhand main story mentions of it? Like, yeah, we're obviously important, but it's not the fact that we're the Angel that makes us that way, right? It's our control over Kris, and involvement in the plot by extension. Is it really just a way that the characters can acknowledge us without saying, "Susie, you don't understand, that's not Kris, that's John from Minnesota"? Well, maybe, but I don't think so. And to explain why, I'd like you to quickly turn your attention to another game, a little-known indie title called Undertale. You see, while it is a far less active piece of the plot, Undertale also has a prophecy, and in the center of that prophecy lies one being, the Angel. Except this time, it isn't us. In fact, I just lied to you again. This isn't even one being, it's 2. Or at least 2. The Undertale prophecy is far simpler than Deltarune's. The Angel who has seen the surface will return and the underground will go empty. And it just so happens that this description aligns perfectly with our 2 final encounters in the 2 main routes, Azrael and Kara. Both characters have seen the surface and, importantly, have been absent from the underground for quite some time, and therefore can return to empty out the underground, albeit in various ways. This is also why I don't think Frisk or the player count as the Angel here, as you could always just do a no mercy route on a fresh save, and you really wouldn't be returning anywhere. Plus, they also just don't have as much in the way of imagery as Azrael and Kara do. Anyway, Azrael does things in the obvious, literal way. He breaks the barrier and the monsters get to leave. Kara, on the other hand, takes a more figurative approach as they end the entire world. And I mean, yeah, I guess that would do it. Another interesting aspect of this pair is their symbology, specifically the fact that Azrael leans more into traditional angel, while Kara straight up calls themselves a demon. a title largely regarded to refer to fallen angels in modern pop culture. Which is also funny because this means Carol was making a pun here, even if they didn't know it. And these clashing symbols of course align with their respective route's tone. The pacifist route is all happy and nice, good, yay! While the no mercy route is sad, boring, evil, boo! You get the idea. Azrael, the angel, is representative of the good route, the route where you'll probably get attached to all the characters and struggle saying goodbye, while Kara, the demon, is representative of the bad route, where you'll be forced to detach yourself from both the characters and the game world as you slowly, painstakingly break it apart, piece by piece. Honestly, it's pretty cool. If only Deltarune had two connected characters, one with angel imagery and one with demon imagery, that represent the good and bad routes of the game. Oh. Yeah, that's right, this is a Noelle and Kris Angel video now! Okay, not literally. For a variety of reasons, I do not think Kris and Noelle are THE Angel, as mentioned so far in Deltarune. Mostly because it's described as if it's some otherworldly being, and these two are just random teenagers. And more importantly, Susie has seen the angel, and there's no way she wouldn't bring it up if it was Kris or Noelle, or both or whatever. There's technically the possibility that they could, transform or something to be unrecognizable from who they are now, which I can't entirely dismiss, especially given how the night exists, but I think the evidence for that is much weaker than what there is for Player Angel. No. We, the players, still have to be the angel, right? I mean, I know the imagery with these two is pretty blatant, but it all still points to us, right? So, how could it be us and them? How can they simultaneously be and not be the angel? Well, I think the answer here lies with Kris. Kris is not the angel, but we, the angel, are Kris, are we not? That's who we're playing as here. That's the solution. Kris isn't the angel is Kris. It's honestly deceptively simple, but I think it makes a lot of sense. But, if that's the case, if the angel is Kris in the normal route, and Noelle is their counterpart in the weird route, then... well, I'll revisit that later. But for now, I will point out that it's pretty interesting that Noelle is referred to as an angel primarily in the weird route by Spamton and the Pink Addison. Otherwise, Spamton calls her a Hochi Mama, so this feels like a pretty intentional choice. Furthermore, a small detail that really stuck out to me in Chapter 4, in Noelle's wardrobe, you can find a pair of tattered angel wings, which Noelle reveals were initially for a pageant when she was little. But she liked them so much that she began wearing them casually. This feels like a very direct and very intentional parallel to Kris's devil horns. So much so that I called it Delta Swap bait back when the game first released. However, under this interpretation, it makes sense that they would both have these very blatant parallels to make the connection tie in further. But if this is really the direction we're going in here, we should probably address the elephant in the room and ask why the roles are switched here. Why is our holy angel for the bad route and fallen angel for the good route? Is it just Deltarune being an edgy teen game compared to Undertale's hope and childlike whimsy, or is there more meaning behind it? Well, I think the answer lies in something I have discussed very briefly before, the holy and unholy imagery present in the game's secret bosses. As I discussed in my Chapter 5 Secret Boss video, while many patterns were broken in the new chapters, one that has remained and cemented itself as likely intentional is that the secret bosses alternate between making use of unholy and holy imagery. Jevil is a jester devil who talks about hell. Spamton is all about trying to get to heaven and praying to the Neo-body. Eram has those big old horns and uses fire magic. And Gerson is the father of a father, wielder of the so-called holy hammer. So then, that's the question. Is there anything that connects these bosses based on which side of the scale they lie that could relate to the weird route? I think so, at least. Otherwise I wouldn't be talking about it. And this thread sewing them together is that the unholy bosses are pro-prophecy and the holy ones challenge it. To put it simply, I believe that the assumed purpose of the weird route on the end of the player is to break the prophecy, whether or not this will actually work. Again, this isn't exactly an original thought, and it's something that I think a lot of people intuitively assume simply based off of vibes, but I really do think there's something there. Especially when we take a look at all this talk of beads breaking off their path and then still being trapped. Rousey talking about how the alternative to the prophecy might be even worse, specifically in the weird route, and not knowing what's up with the eye section on board too. While I do think the normal route will subvert the prophecy in some way, I think it'll do so through something more akin to a loophole, like what we see with Tenna in Chapter 3, while the weird route is dedicated to us really messing things up. Let me explain how the secret bosses support this. The first two are obvious enough, especially after Chapter 4, now that we know that it was Jevil that spread the word of the prophecy to the king. And even before that, he kinda does the same thing for us in Chapter 1 when mentioning Queen. Furthermore, Jevil seems liberated by the knowledge that nothing he does matters, as everything will always end the same regardless. Which would honestly be a pretty healthy mindset if he didn't use it to justify killing people. Spamton is the exact opposite. Desperate to escape his fate, despite the fact that, as he admits after beating him, he was too far gone to cut his strings by the time we meet him. Though, even then, in his last serious words to the gang, he hopes that with his assistance, they may be able to break their own strings. And what else would that be but the strings of fate? I'm gonna skip Chapter 3 for now, as that's where things get a little complicated, but trust me, I will provide an explanation to the questions that most of you are probably having just about now. Gerson isn't as resentful towards the prophecy as Spamton is, but he does kind of spend a fair amount of time literally smashing physical depictions of it. Similarly to Spamton's kinda last words, Gerson also encourages the party, and especially Susie, not to let themselves be limited and defined by some words on a wall, to make their own meaning, and write their own ending. Now the weird one, and I mean that in multiple senses of the word. So, Chapter 3 is already strange in terms of its secret boss, in that it arguably has two. At least that's kind of the way I see it. There's been a lot of debate with several people on opposite ends saying that only one of the two, Eram or the Knight, are the secret boss. The main reason I mentioned Eram earlier when listing bosses out is because it, in a literal sense, is undeniably a secret boss, and has very obvious demonic imagery in its design, while the Knight is a little more complicated. Eram does have one glaring issue in regards to this theory, though. It's like the Weird Route guy. Its whole thing is giving you a Weird Route tutorial and then encouraging Kris to engage with their violent impulses. If I am really saying that the Weird Route is the normal angel route, then why is one of the most blatant, unholy dudes vouching for it so hard? Well, while I can't deny this is strange, what I will say is despite seemingly favoring the Weird Route, Eram does not seem to be of the belief that doing it will change the prophecy. Look at its mocking tone when it asks Kris if they believe collecting the shadow crystals will give them what they want. The line itself is a little vague, but considering the interaction you get when using the shadow crystal on the final prophecy, it seems pretty safe to say that this is referring to the alteration of the prophecy, and by extension, that Eram seemingly has very little interest or faith in such an idea. Indeed, while Eram may like the Weird Route, I suggest that it may have its own personal reasons for that. After all, it seems to want something very specific out of Kris, even in the normal route, and seems to have greater plans for the future regardless of which route you're on. If we count it and have to choose, I definitely say the Knight is the hardest to pin down as strictly holy or unholy. On one hand, it creates the fountains, which have been associated with the theme of the holy. Now to be fair, this could be referring to the process of sealing them, given its use of our light to do so, but it's a bit hard to argue with the Titans who have giant angel wings all around them, and definitely make use of some biblically accurate angel design elements, what with all these eyes and stuff. But while the Titans and fountains may seem a little strange in this context, it's important to consider that they are ultimately obstacles for the prophecy. If they win, the prophecy goes unfulfilled. In fact, the prophecy itself begins to clarify why the bad route would be so angel-coded, because after all, we know that part of the prophecy is the banishment of the angel and its heaven. I'd even go as far to say that it's part of the end goal, at least with the way Rousey phrases it. It seems like once the angel is banished, the world is saved. An act that, I must say, sounds quite unholy, don't you think? In fact, out of any part of the prophecy, it is this section, the banishment of the angel, that Gaster spoke on the Deltarune page all those years ago, before we even knew it existed. This does make the Knight a little complicated though, given it does create these things and seems to be the antagonist of the prophecy. Then again, it's also the primary actor that makes the prophecy possible. And if it wanted to break it, then really all it'd have to do is just stop. So maybe it does want it for some reason? Look, like I said, the Knight is complicated because we just don't know a lot about it. Yeah, it has connections with the Holy, but it also has fire associations and looks like that. For the time being though, because of how little we have to go on, I think I'm just going to say that Eram is what we're counting for this specific pattern, and I'll leave further discussion on how or if the Knight fits into all of it to you guys. Now, with all that said, let's finally return to what I hinted at with Noelle near the beginning of the video. If Kris is indirectly the angel due to the fact that we're controlling them, then what about Noelle? Sure, in the weird route we certainly have command of her, but that's not quite the same as what we have with Kris. And doesn't feel like it justifies the transference of titles either. Well, if you've been around in the community long enough, I'm sure you've guessed where I'm going with this. Yes, I believe that we will take direct control over Noelle at some point in the future. I understand that while fairly popular, this idea has become a bit contentious in the fanbase at large, which I primarily contribute to the way it's been addressed and discussed rather than the concept in its entirety, with it being discussed more as a big twist and shocking thing, rather than as something that would contribute to the overarching story and themes of the Weird Route as you know it. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a moment to analyze it from that angle. Now, on a basic level, I think the connections are fairly clear. A major part of the Weird Route has been eating away at Noelle's agency and enforcing our will onto her. Using her as a tool, making her behave in uncharacteristic ways, worsening her freeze response when putting her in danger, and making her feel like she has to rely on Kris, or more accurately, us, in order to be strong. And by extension, safe. Controlling Noelle the way we do with Kris would be the ultimate escalation of this idea. Not only would we be directly determining her every step, every word she says, but as seems to be the case with Kris, it would also make her more reliant on us, as she would likely literally need us to keep living. In general, I think the fact that the way we would be controlling Noelle would either be by creating another soul within her, or altering her current soul, is a horrific side of things that is often overlooked, likely due to the fact that much of the way the community discusses the soul poses it as synonymous to the player, to us, with the occasional acknowledgement that yes, it initially belonged to Kris, but without much focus on what such a concept holds. The nature of the soul in both Deltarune and Undertale is mysterious. However, two characters that seem like they would be particularly knowledgeable of it describe it as the culmination of one's being. And I think, with that in mind, it's extremely understated just how existentially horrifying having something like this controlled or changed by someone else is. Your soul is you. It's supposed to be the most you part of you. But because of us, it isn't. In the Weird Route, we bring Kris to the point where they feel the need to brutally attack the very center of their personhood, only stopping after hearing the voices of a figure that helped shape them into who they are, who they really are. And now we're doing the same with Noelle, except perhaps even worse, because while Kris's human soul seems like it just naturally fits as a vessel for our input, judging by the red pixels that seem to be spreading, we may genuinely be physically altering the very makeup of her soul. That said, there is also the question of what happens to Kris if we do this. While I suppose it's possible we could swap between them or something, personally I think another option is that Kris may begin to take a role more similarly to what Noelle has before. And I say this mostly due to the existence of one item: the Twisted Sword. This item has always confused me because it requires the Thorn Ring to create. But taking the Thorn Ring off of Noelle in the Weird Route seems to go against what the game has set up thus far, and getting it in an aborted Weird Route feels strange too, because why would you incentivize doing evil stuff first to get a powerful weapon? But under this interpretation, it begins to make more sense, since if we do alter Noelle's soul or make use of a new one as a means of controlling her, we would no longer need the Thorn Ring to do the same, and could repurpose it to maintain secondary control over Kris. Admittedly, it does have a down arrow next to the trance stat, but I think this could indicate that it's a negative status effect rather than Kris having more control with it than without. Of course, it does require the pure crystal to create, something you will likely need 5 shadow crystals for, and as far as we know, only one is currently required for the Weird Route, Spamton's. Now, I don't think this totally kills the idea, as there are always alternative ways we could get more in the Weird Route that you can't normally. After all, the night seems practically made of the stuff. I should also say that I don't necessarily think this is all going to happen very soon. The area of red only spreads slightly by the end of Chapter 4, so it could be something that doesn't happen until like the very end of the game, similarly to how Kara themselves only really starts to make their presence known by the end of the No Mercy route. In fact, I would be surprised if we're playing as Noelle by any point in Chapter 5. I just think that's what it will eventually come to. Anyway, That is my perspective on it, and why I think Noelle and Kris may not be the angel, but are, in a sense, the angels. If that doesn't do it for you though, I do have one other dual angel concept that you might prefer, involving the other main angel candidate that I have yet to mention. That's right, it's the mystery man himself. Gaster Angel is pretty popular, and it makes sense why. He's quite similar to Kara in his fallen angel imagery, not just having the most devilish imagery out of any character thus far, but also quite literally having fallen much like them. He also has holes in his hands, which add a whole other helping of religious imagery to his character, albeit in the whole other direction. He's kinda like the player, sort of above the rest of the world of Deltarune, or maybe below is more accurate. While we're up in the lighter light in heaven, Gaster looks up at us from the depths of hell. Both of us outside of the realm the others dwell in, simply on other sides. Now, does this work with our whole anti and pro-prophecy analysis from before? Well, I think it kinda depends on who you ask, but personally, I'd say yes. I ran a poll over on Twitter a little while ago asking if people thought Gaster was pro or anti-prophecy, and pro won, but only by 3% of the votes. To make my own argument here though, it is said that the prophecy was whispered across time and space, which is also what Gaster was shattered across. This is said twice too, so you know it's important. At the end of chapter 4, Gaster says his Deltarune will be waiting, and as Rouse himself reveals in chapter 1, the legend of the prophecy is called Deltarune. There's also him saying 3 heroes appear to banish the angel's heaven on that old archived version of the Deltarune website all those years ago. Combine this with the first point, and I wonder if this may literally be the moment the legend was whispered across time and space. Furthermore, the prophecy panels are all written in all caps and have the depths as the background. Gaster seems to be fine with the weird route, but I'd say it's in a more similar manner to what we discussed with Eram, that he simply does not think it will be successful in breaking the prophecy. Sort of like how you can get the ring achievement both in the normal route and in the weird route through different means. People bring up his encouragement towards the player in beating the knight, but beating the knight doesn't actually change anything. They still swoon us and get away with Undyne regardless. There is his tweet where he talks about creating a new future with us, but again, considering he goes on in later tweets to call upon Deltarune, I think it's possible the future he's talking about is the prophecy itself. As for what this means for the weird route or normal route, perhaps either us or Gaster could be banished based on the context. It's kind of hard to say which would go into which though, considering you could either argue that they would be relevant to their respective routes, or that banishing, say, Gaster would be a holy act, and therefore fit the weird route, and vice versa. Which does bring me to what critique I will give my first theory as well. Regardless of the route, the player has thus far definitely begun a greater association with the traditional holy imagery, rather than the alternative. I mean, the supposed unholy route is the one where we get put under an angel role statue. I will say that this is also kind of true in Undertale to an extent. Like, the angel as illustrated in the Deltarune itself has traditional angel wings. In fact, you could argue it has more vague wings that could potentially fit a fallen angel in the prophecy panels, but then again it's glass, so sharp corners make sense. Still, I do think there is something here, especially with the prophecy's relationship to the holy and unholy. And I'd love to hear what you think, if I missed something you didn't. What do you think? Are Kris and Noelle our reverse Azrael and Kara? Is Gaster the angel? Are we? Let me know in the comments below. And hey, if you liked the video, give it a like and consider subscribing. It's much appreciated. And I'll have more content like this in the future. Also, apologies for being gone for so long. I had to lock in and get some stuff done, but I should be uploading here more consistently. At least for a while. Chapter 5 is getting closer every day, so I don't know how many theories I'll have in time for this era, but rest assured I will continue to the next. All that being said, drink water, remember to floss, and don't forget, the impossible is possible. All you gotta do is make it so. Good night.